Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of betrayal seemed impossible? Not just love, but the kind of trust that makes you build a future together, sign over power of attorney, and believe, without hesitation, that they'd never use your darkest hours against you. That's what I had with Jessica, or at least that's what I believed. It was just after 9 p.m. in Colorado Springs. I'd finished my last coaching session for the day, grappling drills with the National Junior Wrestling team. My knees ached, my voice was hoarse, and all I wanted was a quiet meal and an early night. But the moment I sat down in my hotel room, I saw the missed call. Then the voicemail. Her voice was distant, almost clinical. "I'm leaving, please. Don't come home. I'm starting over. The accounts are already closed." That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just a swift, cold extraction from a life we'd spent nearly 2 decades building. My name is Bruce Baumgartner. I'm 48 years old. I'm a 2-time Olympic medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. And this is the story of how I lost everything until I found something far more valuable: myself and justice. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone or punch a wall. I just sat there, staring at the gray carpet of that Marriott hotel room, the silence pressing against me like a second skin. The message kept playing in my head, not her words but the tone, measured, prepared, like she'd rehearsed it. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I reached for my laptop, logged into our joint accounts, or what used to be joint. Every balance read 0. Savings, checking, brokerage, wiped clean. Even the emergency fund we'd built after my shoulder surgery had been transferred out. My name was still on the accounts, but I no longer had access. I leaned back in the stiff hotel chair and closed my eyes. I'd wrestled through torn ligaments, fought men twice my size with blood in my mouth. But this moment, this stillness, it was the most disorienting blow I'd ever taken, and yet I didn't panic. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out the second phone. The one I hadn't touched in over a year. No social apps, no contacts except 2. Marcus, my lawyer and closest friend from my college wrestling days, and another line labeled simply, Vault. I opened a new message to Marcus. 4 words. "It's time she moved." I hit send. Within 60 seconds, 3 dots pulsed back. Then the reply. "Understood. Stay put. Don't engage." That was the moment I stopped being Bruce the husband, Bruce the man who thought loyalty would always be enough. I became Bruce the tactician. I didn't know the full extent of what Jessica had done, but I knew this. Whatever her plan was, she thought I'd be too stunned or too slow to react. She thought wrong. I turned off the lights, lay down fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the medals hanging in our hallway back home, the ones she used to polish before company came over. I thought about the birthday video I made for her last year, edited between matches in Budapest. I thought about how calm she sounded. On that voicemail, she wanted a clean exit, but I wasn't done wrestling. Not yet. Jessica wasn't just my wife. She was, for a long time, my reset button, someone who grounded me when the world felt like an endless loop of flights, cuts, weigh-ins, and medals. I met her nearly 20 years ago at a sports rehab center in Denver. I was recovering from a torn ACL after the Pan Am Games, frustrated, bitter, and burning with the kind of internal fire that makes athletes hard to be around. She was a physical therapist back then, sharp, focused, with this unshakable calm in her voice. I remember thinking, she doesn't flinch around pain. That intrigued me. We married 11 months later, quick by most standards, but to us it felt solid. She loved my discipline, she said, my order. She used to tease me about folding towels like I was prepping for a competition. I loved her energy, her intuitive way of reading a room, her laugh that could break tension in seconds. I'd been traveling internationally for competitions for over a decade, and for the first time I started imagining home as more than just a place to store trophies. We bought a modest house outside Boulder. I paid it off in 5 years with bonuses and endorsements. When she wanted to open her yoga and wellness studio, I backed her without hesitation. I built the space with my own hands during an off-season, laid every plank of that hardwood floor. She cried when we opened the doors. Said no one had ever believed in her like that before. For a while, we made it work. I was on the road often. She ran the studio, grew her community, made friends in the wellness space. We had a rhythm. 2 weeks here, 3 weeks gone. She called it our dance. But I started noticing little shifts after I announced I was semi-retiring from active competition. I thought more time at home would make things easier. For her. For us. But instead of excitement, she looked uncertain. She said she missed the spontaneity of the early days, that I'd become predictable. Stable, she used to call it. Now it was routine. I dismissed it as post-COVID fatigue, a phase, something we'd talk through. We'd survived long-distance media pressure, even fertility challenges. What was a little boredom? But hindsight is merciless. Now I see it. She wasn't tired of the life. She was tired of me. Of my order. My boundaries, my consistency. And she'd found someone younger, wilder, someone who didn't fold towels or keep track of tax deductions, someone who didn't see betrayal coming. I should have. But I didn't. 2 mornings after that voicemail, Marcus sent me an encrypted file labeled Initial Findings. I opened it in the silence of my hotel room. The file as cold and precise as a surgical incision. Bank records, transfer logs, screenshots from platforms I hadn't checked in months. Jessica hadn't just emptied our checking and savings accounts. She'd gone deeper. She'd sold off mutual funds we'd held since 2012, liquidated a Roth IRA we'd both contributed to, and cashed out the royalty checks from a wrestling documentary that still brought in passive income every quarter. Total loss? Over $230,000 in less than 3 weeks. But it wasn't just the money. It was how she did it. The funds weren't routed into another personal account. They were funneled, strategically, deliberately, into an LLC titled Ascension Living, listed under a Ty Carter. I'd never heard the name before, but Marcus had. He was already pulling records. The LLC was formed just 6 months ago in Nevada. No physical office. Registered to a P.O. box. The listed phone number bounced to a voicemail saying, "Ascend to your higher self." It sounded like something off one of Jessica's wellness retreat flyers. The real punch to the gut came with the final attachment, a notarized document with my signature authorizing the liquidation of our joint trust, the one set aside for my post-Olympic endorsements, earmarked for future coaching clinics and athletic scholarships. A signature I never wrote. I stared at it for a long time. I knew every nuance of my pen stroke. That wasn't mine. Jessica had forged it, or convinced someone else to do it for her. "Do not respond to anything she sends you," Marcus messaged. "She's moving fast. Too fast. She's planning something. Bigger." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I tamped it down. Anger would only give her more power. I needed clarity. Focus. I needed to remember what I'd learned through years of competition. Control your breathing, anticipate the move, and strike only when it counts. Later that afternoon, I checked our home surveillance system, cameras, I'd installed discreetly after we had a minor break-in years ago. I hadn't accessed them in months. But now, as the feed loaded, I saw strangers in our garage. 2 men loading what looked like my original championship belt display cases into a truck. I recognized the frame, mahogany with gold trim, one of a kind. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just taking the money. She was erasing me, piece by piece, from the accounts, from the house, from the life I thought we'd built together. And she thought I wouldn't notice until it was too late. But this was only round 1. And she'd forgotten. I never stepped onto a mat expecting mercy. By the time Marcus called me that evening, his tone had shifted. It wasn't urgency anymore, it was calculation. "We ran a deep trace on Ty Carter," he said. "And Bruce, this guy isn't new to the game. He's got a pattern, a very specific one." Ty wasn't just Jessica's rebound. He was a predator wrapped in protein shakes and inspirational quotes. Age 26, former amateur MMA fighter turned wellness coach. No fixed employment in the last 3 years. What he did have was a digital trail of short-lived relationships with women aged 40 and up, most of them small business owners or professionals with assets. The first was a divorced art teacher in Flagstaff. She loaned him money for a startup that never existed, ended up filing for bankruptcy. The second was a dental hygienist in Santa Fe. Her house was foreclosed after she co-signed on a private gym lease for him. And the third? That one sent chills through me. She was a triathlete, 45, based in Idaho. Local reports called it a training accident. Her ex-husband had died in a car crash 6 weeks after she filed for divorce. Ty was listed as her support partner on the court filings. The vehicle had gone off a cliff on a road the man had driven for 20 years. No charges were filed, but police had listed Ty as a person of interest. Then the case went cold, and Ty disappeared. Now he was with Jessica, living in my house, driving my car, packing my Olympic memorabilia into boxes with his name on the shipping labels. And if the past was any indication, he wouldn't stay long. He'd extract what he could, let things collapse behind him and vanish, leaving Jessica to clean up the fallout, or worse, be the fall girl. What horrified me most was not that she'd been manipulated. It was that she might have known. She was always sharp, intuitive. Jessica didn't make impulsive moves. If she'd aligned herself with Ty, it wasn't an accident. It was either desperation or willful blindness. Or both. Marcus was already collecting affidavits from the previous women. One of them had emailed back a detailed account, screenshots, Venmo requests, even a threatening message she'd ignored at the time. He'll turn on her, Marcus warned. He always does. But before that happens, we need to move. Quietly. Before either of them suspects you're onto them. I closed the call and stood by the hotel window looking out over the empty Colorado highway. The man in the glass staring back at me wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't heartbroken. He was steady. They wanted to rewrite the story of my life. Strip away my legacy, bury my name under theirs. But they didn't realize. I didn't get where I am by luck. I got here by knowing exactly how to wait, and exactly when to strike. 3 days later, I was on a red-eye back to Denver, traveling under the name B. Garrison, an old alias we'd used when I was doing international clinics and didn't want press attention. Marcus had already booked a private office at a secure co-working space in Boulder. When I walked in, he slid a thick folder across the table and said, "Welcome back. It's time for Operation Titan's Fall." We'd built this contingency years ago, not because I didn't trust Jessica, but because I'd seen too many athletes get blindsided by financial predators after retirement. A friend of mine had lost everything, house, savings, even the rights to his own image after a toxic split. I swore it wouldn't be me. The folder contained copies of forged loan documents, account transfers Jessica had made without authorization, and a quietly chilling piece of evidence. She'd changed the beneficiary on one of my life insurance policies 6 months ago. From spouse Jessica Baumgartner to business partner Ty Carter. That one stopped me cold. They're not just stealing, Marcus said. They're planning for something bigger, possibly something irreversible. I sat, with that implication. The sudden new interest in climbing trips. The reckless speeding tickets I'd seen come in under my name. The way Jessica kept pushing me to go on that winter hiking retreat in Telluride, alone. I hadn't gone. Something had felt off. Now I knew why. Marcus had filed a motion with the court that morning, a preliminary injunction to freeze all assets, under Jessica's control, including the LLC registered to Ty. But before it could take effect, she played her next card. That afternoon, Marcus received notice that Jessica had filed for a restraining order in family court. Her statement was filled with buzzwords: controlling, emotionally manipulative, financial coercion. She claimed I'd hidden money, micromanaged her yoga business, and used military-style intimidation tactics to isolate her. She even included a screenshot of a training schedule I'd made years ago and cited it as psychological abuse. "She's trying to discredit you preemptively," Marcus said. "Build a narrative that you were dangerous, that she left out of fear, Textbook play when someone knows legal retaliation is coming. But what Jessica didn't know was that I had the most unshakable alibi imaginable. I'd been on the books in Colorado Springs, coaching the national team under federal athletic contracts. GPS badges, time-stamped keycard entries, footage from gym security, down to the minute. We began compiling everything. Marcus also subpoenaed her phone records, emails, and IP logs. We found damning overlaps. Calls to Ty during hours she claimed to be teaching. Email logins from hotels in cities she said she wasn't visiting. She wanted a war, I told Marcus, closing the folder. Fine, but she came with theater props. I'm bringing a hammer and the truth. Because this wasn't about revenge, this was about reclaiming my name before they sold it, twisted it, or tried to put it 6 feet under. I arrived back in Boulder under the cover of night, but I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a small craftsman-style house 2 blocks from mine, property owned by Aaron, a former teammate and now a quietly successful wrestling coach who had relocated to Vermont. The house was empty, but its vantage point? Perfect. It gave me a clear view of my own driveway, garage, and front porch. Inside, I reconnected the portable surveillance rig I'd once used to record match footage for athletes, a high-res camera with motion tracking and zoom capabilities. By morning, I was watching my house from a laptop, drinking coffee that tasted like betrayal. Jessica had no idea I was back. She thought I was still at the Olympic training camp, off-grid and unreachable. That gave me an edge. For now. At 8:32, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Ty Carter climbed out, sunglasses, sleeveless shirt, smug posture. He walked into my home like he owned it. A few minutes later, Jessica appeared in the hallway behind him. She kissed him. Brief, mechanical. I zoomed in on their faces. They looked businesslike, efficient. There was no romance, only calculation. Over. The next 2 hours, they packed boxes with disturbing precision. They started in the den, where I kept my most personal things. I watched as Ty lifted the glass case that held my father's pocket watch and the Olympic flag signed by my teammates. Jessica supervised, pointing, texting, flipping through folders on a clipboard. It wasn't chaos. It was coordination. Then I saw something that nearly made me stand up and break my cover. Ty walked into the garage and came out wearing my college wrestling hoodie. He poured himself a glass of my 21-year-old Highland Scotch, the bottle I'd opened only once to celebrate my second gold medal. He toasted the camera without knowing it was there. Jessica laughed. That's when the weight of it all hit me. Not just the theft, not even the betrayal, but the audacity, the casualness with which they dismantled my life, my history, my legacy, all while treating it like some garage sale they were too busy to feel guilty about. Later that day, a woman I didn't recognize showed up. Clipboard, business attire. She started taking photos of the house exterior, front lawn, kitchen. A real estate agent. They were planning to sell my house. Marcus called just then. We got the emergency injunction, he said. The judge froze all properties and accounts tied to both Jessica and Ty. They won't see it coming. I nodded slowly. Then let's make sure the next thing they do see is me. Because if they were bold enough to pack up my legacy, I wanted to be standing right there when the truck pulled out, when the law pulled in, and when the entire illusion they built came crashing down around them. The next morning broke with that strange quiet only people who've waited too long for justice can feel. Every piece was in place. The injunction had gone through, the sheriffs had their orders. A court officer from the county clerk's office was en route with the legal documents: asset freeze, restraining order, divorce petition, and a criminal complaint for forgery and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. And me? I was right where I needed to be, watching from across the street, dressed in a plain gray hoodie and jeans, blending into the porch shadows of Aaron's house like a ghost returned to his own grave. At exactly 8:55 a.m., a white, unmarked vehicle pulled in behind the moving truck that had arrived minutes earlier. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out, followed by a woman in a navy pantsuit carrying a leather folder. Calm, professional, unshakable. I could see Jessica through the living room window, directing two movers toward the hallway closet, no doubt filled with more of my memorabilia. Ty was lounging near the kitchen, coffee in hand, wearing the same hoodie I'd earned in sweat and blood 25 years ago. The knock at the door echoed like thunder. Jessica answered. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I saw it all in her body language. The confident stance faltered. Her eyebrows pulled together. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The deputy spoke firmly. She turned her head, called for Ty. He walked into view behind her, chest puffed, arms crossed, like he thought this was some misunderstanding that could be handled with a few charming lines. And that's when I stepped out from the shadow and walked across the street. Jessica saw me first. Her eyes widened, mouth slackening into disbelief. She blinked as if I were an illusion she'd willed away months ago, but who now refused to vanish. Bruce, she said, almost whispering. I stopped, at the edge of the lawn. Surprise, I said calmly, then nodded to the deputies. Proceed. The stack of documents was handed to both of them. Jessica's hands trembled as she read the top page. Ty, however, tried to play tough. You can't do this, he said, stepping forward. She's scared of you. You manipulated her. Her restraining order was dismissed yesterday morning, I interrupted. The judge reviewed GPS data from my coaching badge, showing I've been 90 miles away every day for the last 7 weeks. Not exactly textbook intimidation, is it? He paused. I could see the gears turning, the realization setting in. I stepped one pace closer, just enough for them both to see the steadiness in my eyes. You two tried to hijack my life. You nearly pulled it off. But the thing about planning your escape while someone else is watching is that you forget who built the road you're running on. Neither of them said a word. The trap had closed, and they'd walked right into it. 3 days later, we sat in Department 4B of the Boulder County Courthouse. The room was modest. No grand chandeliers or wood-paneled theatrics, just clean lines. Rows of pew-like benches and the kind of sterile silence that feels heavier than noise. Jessica sat across from me at the petitioner's table, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. She wore a muted gray suit, hair pinned back, trying to play the role of the rational wronged wife. Ty Carter wasn't beside her. He hadn't shown up since the serving. According to Marcus, Ty had quietly transferred $9,000 out of the LLC account and disappeared, just like he had with the others. Judge Melinda Carter, a former federal prosecutor with a reputation for zero tolerance on financial misconduct, opened the proceedings, calm, sharp. Not one for small talk. Marcus began by submitting evidence: forged signatures on loan documents, unauthorized account transfers, the altered insurance beneficiary form. Then came the most damning exhibit: text, messages between Jessica and Ty discussing how Bruce won't see it coming, and how Plan B was still viable if the asset grab didn't work. Plan B, of course, being a veiled reference to Bruce's accidental death. Insurance money, high-risk job, words that don't belong together unless you're plotting. Jessica's lawyer tried to pivot, claiming emotional instability, misunderstandings, misplaced trust. But the digital records were airtight. The phone data from her logins, the GPS record showing Bruce was hundreds of miles away during every alleged incident of abuse, the real estate listing she had forged his signature on, all of it, told the same story. This wasn't a messy divorce. This was premeditated financial dismantling. At one point, Judge Carter paused, removed her reading glasses, and looked directly at Jessica. You systematically liquidated marital assets, moved funds into a shell corporation, and attempted to sell the primary residence, all while falsely claiming emotional abuse to obtain a restraining order. Were you under the impression these actions would go unnoticed? Jessica tried to respond, but her voice cracked. It wasn't like that. I was scared. Ty said we needed to move fast. Save it, the judge cut in. This court does not adjudicate based on fear conjured in hindsight. In just under 40 minutes, the verdict was delivered. All marital assets to be restored to Bruce. Full ownership of the house returned to his name. Jessica's claim for spousal support denied on grounds of bad faith. And most importantly, the evidence package was formally referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges: fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. As the judge rose from the bench, the room exhaled. Jessica sat frozen, her lawyer, already packing up. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just gathered my papers and stood. The law had spoken. They'd tried to erase me. But in the end, the truth, documented, time-stamped, and delivered with precision, was louder than any lie they'd whispered behind closed doors. It's strange what silence feels like after a storm. Not peaceful, not yet. More like the ringing, absence of chaos, the kind that leaves you blinking in the aftermath, wondering how you're still standing. 3 weeks after the hearing, I drove west through the mountains alone. Windows down, a duffel in the backseat, and my phone turned off for the first time in months. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was reclaiming something that had been mine long before Jessica or Ty ever entered the picture. My clarity. I settled into the small cabin I'd bought years ago in Gunnison County, the one I'd kept off every public record and only told Marcus about. It had no internet, barely a cell signal, and just enough electricity to keep the heat on and the coffee brewing. I hadn't been there since before the London Olympics, but somehow it still felt like home. I brought very little with me. Just a few clothes, a photo of my parents on the day I won my first national title, and my father's old watch, miraculously recovered from one of the storage boxes Jessica had tried to offload. The rest? It could be replaced. Or it couldn't. It didn't matter. I spent my days chopping wood, reading, running along the ridge trails, and slowly writing again. Not a memoir, not yet. Just thoughts, untangled, unfiltered, honest. The kind of words I hadn't let myself think when I was trying to keep a marriage stitched together with silence. Marcus checked in once a week. The DA was moving forward with charges. Jessica had agreed to a plea deal that included restitution payments she'd never be able to make. Last I heard, she was living in a rented apartment above a crystal shop in Arizona, trying to relaunch her brand. Ty was gone. Again. And me? I was still here. Still standing. Still breathing. Not broken. Just cleaner. Leaner. Lighter. Some scars don't fade, but they do stop hurting. Especially when you stop looking at them as damage and start seeing them for what they are: evidence. Proof that you endured. Because betrayal doesn't define a man. What he does after. That's the part that matters. About 2 months after the court ruling, I received a letter forwarded through Marcus's office. No return address, just a clean white envelope and neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a short note, handwritten, signed simply Marla S. She introduced herself as one of Ty Carter's former partners, the second woman he'd bankrupted and abandoned. She'd seen news coverage of the court decision, read about the asset freeze and fraud charges. She thanked me, not just for winning, but for not staying silent. Her words stuck with me. When someone like him wins, it makes the rest of us feel crazy. But when someone like you fights back and wins, there's a little less shame in the world. That's when it really hit me. This whole thing had never just been about Jessica or Ty. It was about a pattern, one that feeds on trust, silence, and hesitation. Most people don't have the tools or the team or the presence of mind to see it coming, let alone stop it once it starts. I had all three. And I had time. Barely. A few weeks later, Marcus confirmed the district attorney's office was pursuing charges. Jessica pled out, no jail time, but she'd be paying restitution for years. Ty, however, wasn't so lucky. He was picked up in Utah under a fake name while trying to pitch a fitness investment collective to a recently widowed business owner. He's currently awaiting trial for multiple counts of identity fraud and financial coercion. And me? I teach wrestling now, quietly, privately. I work with young men who've seen too much disappointment and not enough purpose. I tell them that strength isn't just what you show in the arena. Sometimes the real fight is what you do when no one's watching. And when you win that fight, everything else becomes just training. What happened to Bruce isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a reflection of a deeper truth that too many overlook. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it's the ones you trust most who inflict the damage that cuts the deepest. financial manipulation, emotional gaslighting, strategic deception disguised as love. These aren't accidents, they're tactics, and they're more common than you think. From a legal and psychological standpoint, Bruce's story is a case study in resilience and preparation. He didn't react with rage or impulse. He responded with clarity, discipline, and documentation. That made all the difference. His story proves that when you combine emotional strength with strategic foresight, justice can be served and your life can be reclaimed. If you're watching this and something feels familiar, don't ignore it. Get informed. Get support. And most importantly, don't stay silent, because silence is where these patterns grow. If this story moved you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen betrayal dressed as love? What would you have done in Bruce's shoes? Let's keep the conversation going below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to finally see the truth.